It wouldn't be live if it wasn't a little bit awkward. But hello, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Jessica, also known as Meta Dev Girl, and this is episode 7 of the Crawl Walk Run podcast. So I'm excited to be here today. I have all the chats open on all the screens just in case anyone is joining me live on Twitch, YouTube, or on LinkedIn. So I had something that I thought I could talk about today, and it's a question I got recently from a student, but it's also something that I've gotten over time. And I had this question when I was first starting out. And it's very interesting because I think that there is this tendency, this urge, sometimes even we feel like we might have this responsibility when we're first getting started as developers to learn all the things. I think that, there's a lot to be said about it. So I figured why not talk about that today? I have a lot of thoughts. Obviously, I'm giving my own personal opinion on the matter, but hopefully this will be helpful for someone else that's really just trying to understand whether or not it's necessary for you to learn multiple languages. And if so, what is the baggage that you're going to have to carry in order to do that effectively? So, yeah, that's my little spill on the topic today. So, I guess I'm going to just dive right in. Now, I want to start back at let's see, if I go back to the beginning of my journey. So again, most people if you've been listening to the show, then you already heard my story a couple times in different forms and fashion, but I don't think I've really talked too deeply about this in particular. So when I first got started in programming, I actually learned front end web development. And this is like around 2014 or 2015 ish. So back then, it's like kind of a long time ago now. But back then, it was more so vanilla languages. Like we had jQuery, that was like the most popular library for JavaScript, but JavaScript frameworks were still kind of in their infancy compared to how they are now. Obviously, when I was very, very first starting out, it was really practical to be learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, learning the vanilla forms. And when I say vanilla, I really just mean the plain forms of those languages. So HTML is pretty straightforward. It's not too much you can do with it, unless you get into a framework where you can get into templating. So I started out learning HTML. Of course, if I'm going to be a web developer, that is a necessity. I have to learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I was able to learn HTML, and then I learned CSS, obviously for styling. We didn't have like CSS Grid or Flexbox or anything like that back then. So it was a lot of vanilla, a lot of even like experimental. Um, there was a lot of experimental features in CSS that are probably, fully implemented into the language now, but back then they were still pretty early on, as far as whether they were going to be fully incorporated. So that would be, just doing like special types of designs and special types of layouts. But then if you really wanted to kind of get into having a grid system, then we had to use Bootstrap at the time. So I learned HTML, I learned CSS, I learned Bootstrap, because Bootstrap was like that was our replacement for Grid and Flexbox back then. So I would say it was one of the core tools that you would learn for CSS. And then I went into JavaScript. So of course with JavaScript, I learned the basic language. Um, I was learning JavaScript from the perspective of just doing traditional web development, right? So I was building interactivity into my sites, nothing back end related. It was, what happens when you have buttons pressed on the site, any type of interactions, any type of what I want to say, like animations. That was what jQuery was really nice for. So that was like my core. So I started out with that, and that was pretty interesting, but it was pretty straightforward. So then I had this epiphany that I wanted to be a full stack developer. And yeah, nowadays it's a lot more practical than it was at the time because back then, in order to be a full stack developer, we didn't really have the JavaScript's like backend ecosystem in the same way that we have it now. We didn't even really have like React was still kind of being introduced at the time. Angular was in like its very first version at the time as well. So yeah, when I decided I wanted to be a full stack developer, I was asking for a lot. And I really didn't understand that at the time. I'm like, it's a programming language. Oh, I know how to use my programming language. Like, what more do I need to know? I know how to make variables. I know how to write functions. I can do loops. Like, I knew all the standard programming tools when it came to using JavaScript. So I wanted to become a full stack developer, and that meant that I actually had to learn a second language in addition to JavaScript. So I played around with different languages, but I ended up pursuing Java because at the time, uh, if you wanted to, I took a boot camp, and Java was the most popular backend language in the area that I live in. So I learned Java on the back end. And yeah, it was like I had to literally go and pursue a whole nother a whole nother set of technologies in order to become a full stack developer at the time. I ended up doing a lot of full stack development in Ruby on Rails when I started working as a full stack engineer. And even with that, the framework was really nice. But again, that was another language that I had to learn on top of learning Java. So yeah, I've been down this rabbit hole for sure. And the funny thing is, fast forward now, what, 7 years later, probably, I do focus on multiple languages still. However, I have had to really narrow my scope over time. And I think that that was something I really struggled with in the beginning. Again, I wanted to know all the things and learn all the things. And I think I have like a natural curiosity. So I decided, okay, I'm going to learn Java. And I learned JavaScript. And then I was like learning Ruby and I was learning PHP a little bit. I don't really love PHP, but I did WordPress development freelance. So I was learning PHP. Then I kind of got a little bit more into PHP because I was doing Laravel. Like I was just tacking them on. And it was funny because when I was trying to make my thumbnail for this episode, I got this I got this vision of like a scout badge or a scout sash. Like if you ever been like I was a Girl Scout when I was little, I was a brownie. Let me see if I can show it. A brownie Girl Scout uniform. I'm gonna show a picture because not everybody probably is familiar, but here's a good one. Let's see. Where is it? Okay, here's a uniform guide. Okay, I was a brownie, so we'll look at the brownies. Let's look at the brownies. Um, Let me share it. Mm, okay. So we looking at the brownies right now. Again, for me, I was a brownie, and this is what I was thinking about when I started thinking about what it takes whenever we start to try to pursue multiple languages. Um, I feel like there's a tendency to approach programming languages the way that we might approach um, troop badges and scouts. And I definitely don't like, I'm putting myself on blast right now. I hope that I'm not like making anybody, I don't want to call anybody out. This is not to judge, it's just to think about it from a different perspective. So when I was in Girl Scouts, we got different awards and different did a certain challenge, then on either your vest, your sash. If you have a sash, you might actually get to a point where you got a vest and a sash, and they're just all covered up with all these different badges. And um, or even like we collect stickers on our laptop. I think about how we just like tag more and more stickers on, and it's easier to accumulate the badges um when you only need to know things from a shallow perspective. But in programming, the thing that you want to focus on more so than acquiring and amassing a certain number of skills is focusing on mastery. It's really all about the mastery. And that is something that I think I couldn't even really fathom at the time. Um, and maybe I never even had this conversation with anybody to get that feedback, because I'm sure that many of the mentors I had would have been able to kind of point me in the right direction when it came to thinking about, how I manage languages and things of that nature. So, first and foremost, let me say this: there's already enough to learn even with picking a single language when you first start out. Um, and so I'm of the firm belief that knowing more languages does not make you a better developer. Um, and sometimes actually trying to know more languages, I would say more often than not, trying to know more and more languages, it actually hinders, your progress as a developer. Because I think I mentioned this way back in like episode one, probably. It was like things that I wish I knew when I was first getting started. You begin to spread yourself too thin when you're trying to approach multiple languages. And so I don't think that it was necessarily wrong for me if I did want to have a full stack role. And a full stack role was definitely something that was, um, it existed in the industry, it was achievable. But yeah, the amount of work that you have to put in order to maintain, the mastery that you would need across multiple languages, that part really wasn't evident to me. So yeah, I just really wanna kind of hone in on that idea. And so, like I said, I don't think it was necessarily wrong that I was like, okay, I want to be a full stack engineer. That's totally fine. Nowadays, we have full stack programs. A lot of web development programs are full stack programs now, and that's awesome. But the flawed mindset that I had at the time was in believing that I knew all there was to know when I was really only scratching the surface of the first language. So, um, I'm just want to say, like, if you are considering learning multiple languages, first and foremost, if you haven't gotten the full grasp of the first language, I do not recommend you switching over to try a new language. And I don't recommend people language hopping either. So that's a very common thing that can come up, right? Like you'll try JavaScript, and I mean, if you're doing front end development, if you're doing web development, you have to learn JavaScript. Like that's a given. So if you chose web, I'm sorry, it's okay. You can learn new stuff later, but you have to learn JavaScript first and foremost. So if that's the lane that you're in, that's okay. Stay in your lane. There is so much to know about programming beyond just making a variable, making functions, and implementing a framework into your application. So, again, taking that mindset shift to go from collecting badges to um, mastery, right? Mastery of a subject. In troops, when I was a brownie, I could get all the badges in the world. I could get 10, 20 badges. I could get every single badge that was potentially offered, because it probably took me, one challenge or one task in order to get that achievement. But just, knowing how to do hello world in every single language is not enough to really be able to, I would say, pin that badge on your sash as a developer. You really want to be, this is the way I would look at it. If I don't feel comfortable going into an interview and answering specific questions about multiple languages, like I can't speak to both of those languages, in some type of a to show some type of experience with the language, I wouldn't be trying to, tack that on. Now, I think it's good, to have exposure to different things and see how different languages work. But yeah, it's not a badge. It's not a Girl Scout brownie sash that you're just like filling up with all these badges. And that was a mindset that I think I probably had at the time. And as I mentioned before, there's different motivations. So sometimes you could be like me, I wanted to know all the things. I'm naturally curious, but I also felt like there might have been some type of unspoken obligation to know as much as you can possibly know. And that's the dangerous thing to kind of play around with when it comes to being a developer in general. Because again, you can literally never know everything. If anybody knows everything, um, please let me know. I haven't met one person that knows everything there is to know about development, right? I think that it's probably impossible. And nowadays, things they change so frequently that you have to always be keeping up. So yeah, I think it's good to focus more on one single language if you're early on, like if you're in a boot camp, because that's the best example I can give. If you're self-teaching or if you're in a boot camp and you're trying to, maybe get to that first job role, there is no real need to try to learn two different languages. If you are pursuing a full stack role, then that may be a case where yes, you're going to have to pursue multiple languages just because by nature of web development and how the browser works, obviously you have to learn JavaScript and then you would need a back end language. But the beauty of now versus when I started out, you can use JavaScript on the back end. And most full stack programs that I know of, they teach JavaScript on the back end. So, there's really still not a need to learn multiple languages in the same way that it had been in the past. So that's one thing that I kind of been thinking about when it came to just learning the languages. Now, this is this is why this is why I feel like it's important to talk about this because there's like programming goes so much deeper, software development goes so much deeper, and sometimes people even wonder what's the difference between a developer and an engineer, software engineer? Some companies, it's really just a matter of a title, but in some companies, it really is a matter of specific type of experience and a specific knowledge set, a specific problem solving responsibility that you have going from what might be considered a developer to what is considered to be an engineer. So for me, I have held roles that are developer roles. I have held roles that are engineer roles. But over time, I think that when I was quote unquote a web developer, I used jQuery to do animations on my website using JavaScript. I knew how to do basic functions. I knew how to do language fundamentals. I knew how to do basic programming. That was me as a developer. But as a software engineer, I have to think beyond the functionality of the project that I'm working on, right? So I have to think about how is the whole entire software system architected? How do all of the different elements of the system interconnect with each other? How do you get data flowing in through your system in any type of an efficient way, right? What happens when you start having bottlenecks in your system? What happens when your code base is in a state where it doesn't seem like it's easy to manage and you have to think about that, right? How do you implement a large scale system with a lot of different engineers all working on a lot of different parts of the project? How do you manage the version controls and deployment and having different environments, having your stagings and production and development environments, right? There's a much bigger picture than just this is the ticket I picked up and this is the feature I have to implement. So that's where my mind goes when I think about like a developer having a software developer role and versus when I had a software engineering role. Um, so yeah, when I was first starting out, I'm like, oh, I know jQuery. I know how to, get some stuff to move on a page. But I jumped into knowing Java before I really understood what the heck jQuery, the design pattern was with jQuery, right? If you're familiar with JavaScript, then you would know or should know at some point you should know that in JavaScript we have a lot of callback functions. The concept of a callback function, and then we ended up with the concept of nested calls, right? So that's just a JavaScript thing. It might happen in some other languages, but I know it's super common for us in JavaScript. Um, the idea that if I call a function and then I pass another function to the function that I'm calling, right? A callback function. Um, I didn't understand that before I jumped into Java. I didn't understand object-oriented programming before I jumped into Java, or any second language. I didn't understand the architecture of how a web application works. I didn't understand the request response cycle in depth. Obviously, I knew how to make an API request. I knew how to yeah, I would say I knew how to make an API request. I knew how to handle, maybe handle some errors, but I didn't really know much about it beyond that. I didn't learn about different types of protocols that you could interact with, right? In the web, we learned HTTP, we learned that protocol, but there's so many other protocols that you can also learn about. And I didn't really know anything about that. So I could probably go down the list, man. Um, but it was so many things that I could have gotten deeper into in JavaScript before I went on to another language. And I would say that having taken the time to go really deep into my first language would have set me up better for a future language as well. Because once I got into Java, Java is very different from JavaScript. So Java, you have to have classes, and you have to really kind of get more into object-oriented programming, object-oriented design, and things of that nature. So there was still so many things that I had to learn when I picked up my second language. And then I ended up having to go back around and try to get deeper in JavaScript. So, yeah, there's a lot to it. And there is one question. Dolores, thank you for your question, which says, thanks for speaking on this topic. Can you touch on data structures and algorithms? Is it important for programming on the job? That's definitely another area that I highly wish that I had pursued first before diving into a second language, right? Because again, this is where in some companies, this is where the distinction comes between a software developer and a software engineer. I'm not saying that in order to be a software engineer, you have to know data structures and algorithms. But I can say personally, I think I was 3 or 4 years into my career, and I was in a really awesome role at a high-tech startup with a lot of smart people, and I found sometimes that I wasn't I I felt like I wasn't speaking the same language as everybody else, or rather, everybody else was speaking a language that I didn't understand. There was things like knowing more about, uh, data structures outside of this maybe the basic arrays or lists. There was things about like knowing different types of algorithms and how those play together, and how we could apply those to different problems that we had that I would have benefited from knowing by the time I was 4 years into my career. So yeah, I do think that it is important, although I will be honest in saying that for the most part, a lot of times, we can get away with not knowing data structures and algorithms, in depth. For like I said, I didn't. I For like at least 4 years, I worked as a software engineer. I didn't really know anything beyond like the basic lists, and I knew a little bit about like I did like some stacks and queue problems at some point, and I didn't realize that that's what that problem set was focused on. So I understood some of the concepts, but then when I got to a really large code base, we were doing research and development, right? So we're product engineers, but we're building something that never existed before. So it's not like you just go online and you can just copy how somebody else told you to build a blog platform. It's like we have to decide how the platform is going to work, how our data is going to flow, and some of the things that folks were implementing into the program, I didn't have the prior knowledge to recognize what I was looking at. So the code, might have looked uh, it might have looked a bit strange to me, or I might not have actually seen, oh, this is the pattern that we're using. So there's data structures and algorithms. Yes, I do think that those are important and helpful, especially if you are going to be doing anything back end related, because you have to think a lot about the data flow and how you manage data in your application. And I would try to learn more about it sooner rather than later, even if you can get away with not knowing it. Now, certain companies, it's a given. Like if you want to work at Google, and I was just saying this to my students maybe the other day, but I was like, if you want to work at Google, I mean, it just is what it is. Like you have to know data structures and algorithms because that's a part of their interview process. That's a baseline skill to them. So they will give you resources and let you know what types of things you probably want to focus on in the interview process, what types of things you might want to brush up on or review. But yeah, some companies, it is absolutely a requirement because it's just a structured part of their interview process. But then other companies, it's more practical skills, right? It's more, okay, hey, here's a code challenge for you to do. We want you to build an integration to this API that we built. Like, make a request to the API and display it on the page in some type of format. So it's a little bit more practical. It doesn't really dive deep into that, but I hope that that would answer the question. And to tack on to that, I would say design patterns. So I have a book. I literally have a book here today that I think is really cool. Back here. Actually, you can see both of the books I have are related to what we're talking about right now. One is a textbook, but this is a popular textbook, the Intro to Algorithms. Um, Corman Learserson and Revest and Stein. Those are the authors. I have a third edition. I think they're on the fourth edition, but that's a common book that's used. So I chose to really grab me one of those over time because I'm like, I really, that's my personal choice. There's other approaches that you can take to learning data structures and algorithms, but um, I have gone out of my way to try to, you know, skill up and fill gaps that I feel like I skipped over earlier on. And then I do really love like Head First. O'Reilly is my favorite publisher for programming based books. Yes, I buy books. Um, and something like a design pattern book is definitely going to be something that you can have over time without having to worry about it. You don't have to worry about whether or not uh, you're gonna like it's gonna be um, out of date, a year after you buy the book. Because most of the design patterns that we use are common patterns that have been used for many years now. But I like the Head First series because the Head First series is really straightforward and they try to make it, approachable, plain English. And they use different illustrations, they use different analogies and metaphors. So they really try to break it down in like a easy to understand way versus a textbook style. But yeah, even the design patterns. So those are two things that I like highly would recommend if you haven't really dove into design patterns with your language and understood a little bit more about those. If you haven't dived into data structures and algorithms in your language and learning a bit about those, and this is a career you want to do for the foreseeable future, I would definitely take a look into those avenues before I would go and try to pursue another language. And this is what it really boils down to, because at the end of the day, um, I, I usually end up, I always tell my students, like, when you're entry level, They're not hiring you because you know 15 languages, because you don't know 15 languages. Even if you know how to, again, like I said, do hello world in 15 languages, that's not knowing a language. Being able to build a basic application in Java does not mean you really know Java, because it's when you get to the hard parts, it's when you actually get to something that you can't easily look up online, it's when you get to, a complicated bug in your system where you really start to show what your experience level is like with your language. So if I and I have, for full transparency, I have definitely worked on a hiring team um, within software engineering. So even as like a mid-level engineer, I helped review resumes. Um, I helped to sit in on different portions of the interview process. Um, I worked in a pair programming environment, so I also did pair with people who came into interview. And in our case, it wasn't just like, oh, I'm mid-level, so I only pair with people that are junior or mid. No, I paired with senior people, I paired with mid-level people, I paired with junior people, right? So again, when you're entry level, I'm not thinking about, and what I saw from other folks on the team, right? We're not really thinking about, oh, like we're not going to try to throw the most advanced thing at you. We're not going to say, here's a brand new system that we're going to implement and then expect you to be the person to come up with the entire design of the program and how it should work. But we are going to be looking to see, do you know some of the fundamental concepts that you need to know? More so, are you able to work in a team environment depending on how those teams work? Some teams are very independent, each person working solo, versus in our environment, it was a pair programming environment. So you're going to typically always be paired up with somebody unless you have an uneven team. Um, so we're looking more for fundamental skills, fundamental your coachability and things of that nature, so that we know over time we're going to be training you and we can train you up as long as you have a good solid foundation. So for me, I would trust someone having a more solid foundation if they focused in on one language and learned a lot about software through that one language, versus if they tried to learn 5 languages and they just have very basic surface level knowledge of all 5 of those languages. So hopefully that kind of explains where I'm coming from with that idea. And I will put some links. I'll share links to the 2 books that I mentioned as well if you want to get them. I usually get all my books on Amazon. So I'll put like some Amazon links. There'll likely be affiliate links for the record. So you won't have to pay anything extra. You'll just have regular price. But if we get like a little bit of commission, it can go back into making the content. So fair disclosure there. But yeah, I buy books and I feel like they are really, really helpful. So now, when it comes to your programming language in particular, again, there's different things that you can look into. So learning the core of the language, of course, um, diving into the spec for your language. That's a very advanced skill that I think a lot of people don't really do um, early on, or some people hardly ever, if ever, actually look at the spec for their language or the specification for their language. So let me see if I go to a JavaScript spec, which the JavaScript script spec is really ECMA. It's ECMAScript because that's the official language spec. And here we can come back here for a minute. I'm sharing the absolute wrong tab. Yay me, I'm so good. But let me see. Stop that one. Present. Present this one. Okay. So yeah, I would learn more about the language spec that for my language, right? I would actually dive into the inner workings. Okay, I know, like for example, I know that there is a two string method for an array in JavaScript, right? Just giving a random example. I can get comfortable with going through the documentation, get comfortable in really understanding how different methods work, how different data types work in my language. So, for example, in JavaScript, something that people don't tend to really understand early on is if I use arrays as an example, which methods actually modify your array and which methods don't modify your array, right? Um, there's actually a distinction between that. Not all methods are created equally. Not all methods, return in the same type of way or transform the data in the same type of way. So, just knowing how to use those different methods, okay, that's definitely one level. But going a layer deeper and saying, hey, I'm going to look at for us, we can think about Mozilla Developer Network has pretty much all the different documentation and really, really good descriptions, really good details when it comes to working with some of the different methods. Um, but do you feel comfortable going through your documentation? Do you feel comfortable learning to use methods that you've never used before? Right? Do you understand what to look for? And do you understand how to answer the questions that you have? So I would definitely pursue understanding the documentation, like I mentioned, versus just, jump into another language. Because again, all of these skills, these are core foundational skills. Some of the things that you learn will probably be unique to your language. That is true. However, even though they might be unique to your language, there's still there's still a layer of knowledge that gives you a broader picture when you do go to another language, right? So now if I go into the inner workings of JavaScript and I understand how it works under the hood, I understand why it's different from Java, because there's different ways that they have implemented certain features that's not the same as how it would be implemented in Java. So yeah, I would recommend that. So like for JavaScript, because I'm picking on JavaScript, that's my main language, and that's the one that I teach. I'll say that's the one that I usually see a lot of people have to or get the desire to potentially add another language on. So yeah, with JavaScript, I would go and see, I would read more about through the documentation. I would get more comfortable with parts of the language I never used before. I would learn more about the spec itself. Like it blew my mind one time. Again, I used like a specific point in time, a specific company I worked for where I feel like the world opened up to me and I saw all the things that I was kind of missing out on in my technical experience up until that point. And so that was the first time I saw somebody open up the spec to like figure out why something wasn't working a certain way. I was like, wait, I can read the language spec? Like, you always hear about it and talk about it, but yeah, you can absolutely read the spec. For ECMAScript, they have the different versions online. Let's see, it's gonna be ECMA-international.org. And then from here, I can actually look at I can either download it or I can look at the HTML form of the current spec. So this is the 14th edition, June 2023, right? So when new features come out in your language, when you're not really sure how something is working or something is working in an unintended, unexpected way within your application, you can actually go and dig a little deeper and see what's happening under the hood. What happens inside of those methods is not a black box. A lot of the different languages we use are open source. So you can actually go and find out, oh, how is this method implemented and what does it do, under the hood. And I don't necessarily feel that those are something that are beginner exercises. I wouldn't say, "Oh yeah, you just started programming. Okay, go read your spec." No, but before I would go and learn a second language, I would definitely try to feel a lot more comfortable with the more advanced, intermediate and advanced skills around my particular language, and that will absolutely translate over. So, yeah, I'm not sure if there's more I can say without beating a dead horse or whatever however the saying goes, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, and now I can talk about this. So again, there's pros and cons. Depending on what kind of role you want, depending on what company you work for, it may be true that they have some requirements for you to work with multiple languages. Um, Even if that's the case, even if, again, like I said, for me, I was a full stack developer. I was a full stack engineer, actually. That was like my designation because I was working at a company at the time. My first full stack role, we did have a distinction between developer and engineer, and we had front end developers, and we had full stack engineers. Um, yeah, I did have to manage knowing two languages. Actually, I was at a consultancy at the time, so not only was it kind of a part of my job to know multiple languages, but, um, more than 2 languages because we had clients that had WordPress, custom WordPress, sites and integrations and custom WordPress plugins, so that's PHP, and then we also had companies or, we had projects in Ruby on Rails, um, so we language hopped. And, that was a part of the job, but it's a trade-off. So, again, I think that you still wanna focus more on mastery, and you don't wanna acquire more skills than is necessary. Um, or I should say you don't wanna acquire more languages than is necessary. I actually didn't talk about this yet, but another thing that you definitely should see if you have or get some experience in before you try to hop and learn a second language is learn how to use libraries and frameworks in your existing language. Because there's a lot, again, it's the same thing as what I talked about before. Um, I didn't hmm, I did not learn a framework in JavaScript before I jumped into Java. But Java is a back-end language, and when it comes to web development, most of the times we use frameworks on the back end. So I when I learned Java, it would have been a lot nicer. The process of learning a framework would have been a lot nicer if I was already experienced with the concepts of a framework in general, right? Routing, templating, database connections, queries, and things like that. If I had pursued a framework first, just kind of learning how to use a language in a different form, I think that that definitely would have paid off in the long run, as well. So, yeah, if you do have to manage multiple languages, I don't think that it's a I would recommend not learning more languages than you need to know and going as in depth as you can, focusing on mastery of your languages. So over time, back in the day, I was like, oh, I know Java and I know JavaScript and I know Python and I know PHP and I know Ruby. And I was just like, I was literally that person. Like, I got my Girl Scout sash on, like, pin another badge on, pin another badge on, pin another badge on. Um, but now I focus on 2 languages. So that's where I am, at this point in my journey. I focus on 2 languages, and I am focused on really learning those 2 languages, um, as thoroughly as possible, and I have to limit myself. So, I've gotten better with it over time. I've gotten comfortable with it over time to be able to say, "You know what? I cannot be a developer of all the things. Like, there's some limitations in life. And so one of the reasons why JavaScript is always, I think, going to be my favorite language. I would consider it to be really my first language. And I don't, even when I stepped away from doing JavaScript in it for an extended period of time, I kind of, I felt a gap in my heart. So I keep JavaScript, and I teach a lot of JavaScript. I still do, a lot of web applications, but I also uh, decided to pursue Python a little while ago because I knew that my interest is in machine learning and AI. And That was one of the main languages that I could use to pursue that field. But also, that's a very great alternative backend language to JavaScript, right? I know that I can do Django or Flask on the back end, as opposed to trying to bring in a whole nother language. So I felt like, Python is pretty good general purpose language. So I made that choice. I made that choice a couple years ago, actually, just to focus in on those two languages in particular. And for me, I have even gone as far as um, kind of removing myself from a role where I felt like I was being taken in a direction that was counter to the things that I wanted to do in the long term. So I was working for an amazing company, amazing team, doing, you know, I felt like I was kind of living a dream in one regard. But the downside was that I was a Java developer, or I was a software engineer, but I was doing Java at the time. And then we were branching out into Kotlin because Java and Kotlin are they're interoperable. So it made sense that we were using Java and Kotlin together. But for me, doing Java all day long and then coming home at night and trying to do side projects that were in Python and JavaScript, like it's a whole mindset shift. It's a context switch. It's a really drastic context shift. Um and it became very, very, very overwhelming after a while. Like, I was just mentally exhausted, and I was not willing to, give up on learning the things that I wanted to learn because, again, that's what I wanted to pursue, for the future of my career. So, I did make a hard choice at one point to be like, "You know what? I really love the work that I'm doing, but the fact that the work that I have during my day job does not at all align with what I'm trying to do in the long run. That was a hard choice that I had to make personally. And everybody's different, so you have the ability to kind of weigh your options when it comes to that. But I do recommend, if you haven't already experienced it, you can definitely lead yourself to burnout significantly by trying to take on too many languages at a time, especially when those languages are very, very different in their styles, in their approaches, in their syntax. Um, there's a lot of things that translates over when it comes to programming languages, but there's a lot, like, some languages are kind of really, really seem to be opposites of each other. And that's kind of a spot where I found myself in. So I just made that choice on a personal note. And if you, like I said, if you have to manage multiple languages, just know it is work. It is absolutely work. You shouldn't be approaching it from the perspective of, "Oh, I can just learn the basics and that's enough." Because for most people, for most companies, if they're trying to hire you, they want you to actually have some practical level of, skills and experience in those languages. That you put 15 languages on your resume, but then if they put you on a project, you really don't understand any project in any language. Like, that's not benefiting anyone. And it definitely will overwhelm you really soon, a lot sooner than you think. So I don't want to come off as negative or, I'm not trying to rain on anybody's parade. I just want to be realistic about it and give you that perspective so that you can be more responsible with it, right? Because think about a tool set. Some people might know the very basics, right? I go by, a small pre-made tool set from from Home Depot or whatever. I've done it many times in the past. I can do some basics. I can do some real basics. Like, I got one drill. It's sitting literally right back there. It's right back there, but behind the TV. I got one drill. It got one bit. That's it. Like, I can only do so much with that small tool bag. Now, I could probably impress a couple people when I put together a desk, but when it comes to time to put together or do, like, work on an entire room, if it came time to build a house, I'm gonna be lacking significantly when I only know, a tool bag that's about this big. Excuse me. So if I know a tool bag that it can sit I know the tools within a tool bag that can sit in my lap versus knowing tools within excuse me, knowing tools in multiple toolboxes. I have a friend, she's really into doing her own some of her own work around her house, and also she likes to build some stuff, and like she has an entire tool room, right? She has a whole workshop. She got saws and all kind of stuff that I'd never touched before. So again, for her, being able to approach a specific type of problem, or try to build a specific type of project that she might be interested in, she has a lot more to work with. She has a lot more experience because she has gone a lot more in depth with that particular skill set. So maybe that's helpful. I don't know. But I really just wanted to talk about that. And hopefully, again, as I mentioned, that this will be helpful for you all, no matter where you are in your journey. Um, there's a lot of value to being a master. And I'm going to talk about this maybe even in the next episode. There was this article, and I think I mentioned it in the past, about it was like learn to program in 10 years. Nowadays, it's all about learning the program as fast as possible. But even though you might, again, become practical, have practical skills in a language, you still are leaving so much on the table if you have that be the end of your pursuit of knowledge when it comes to a specific language. So, I know we have a lot of pressure to learn a lot of things and learn them really fast. There's already enough to learn without trying to tack on multiple languages to manage. So, just keep that in mind. And I hope that you all will give me feedback and let me know if there's other types of topics that I can cover. And I am looking forward to seeing y'all in the next episode. I have recently launched on metadevgirl.com. I'm very excited because I will be posting not only all of the different podcasts that I've been doing over the past 6 months or so, but I also have been trying to get back into blogging, and I have been I scheduled out an entire fall schedule, which includes different workshops and courses I'm going to be launching. So yesterday was our very first workshop. We did a workshop on let me see. We did creating your GitHub portfolio using the personal GitHub Pages domain that they provide for us. So we set that up to get started for this month, but next week, I'm going to be launching a JavaScript crash course, which will be on demand, and that'll be a really deep dive into the language, right? So it'll go from beginner concepts all the way to some intermediate and advanced skills. And afterwards, the week after that, we're going to have another live workshop in which we will be using Next.js to build out our portfolio websites and deploying those over onto GitHub Pages. So Next.js is a React JS framework. So I thought that would be a really nice, awesome challenge, and also would fit within the skill set of a lot of folks that are interested in building out their portfolios. So stay tuned, look out for more in regards to that. And no matter where you're watching or listening, you can leave a comment and just let me know what other types of things you would be interested in hearing about. And I'll definitely find a way to get it into either this show or one of the other shows that we've been running on a weekly basis. So I look forward to seeing you all in the next episode. Again, feel free to follow me wherever you are now, and also join our site for free at metadevgirl.com for more of my upcoming workshops and courses. And I will be seeing y'all in the next episode.